Good evening, everybody. We're going to have a session on mucormycosis now. The next 15-20 minutes, I'm going to talk about the evidences we have and how we can go about with mucormycosis. When I went through the literature, I kind of realized that despite the amount of mucor we see, literature from India is sparse. So this is one disease we probably will have to work on more and publish. So starting with mucor. Mucor is a disease, it's a fungal infection, produces spores. Spores are the infectious agent, not the mycelia. And this mucor is everywhere. The decaying food, all those decaying animal products, it is there everywhere around you. And there is no way you can eliminate it from the environment. But what made it so big now? What has caused it? Nobody is really sure about it. So epidemiologically, there's Rhizopus species, Mucor species, Canganella, Rhizomucor, etc. The commonest is Rhizopus rhesus. This is what is a commonest etiological agent in our country. As of now, we have not had uh, exact organisms, especially with speciation and cloning across India. I think it should be out soon. And one good thing about Rhizopus rhesus, it is sensitive to isavuconazole, posaconazole, and amphotericin. So going on to the transmission, this is usually spread by inhalation route. The spores get inhaled and then it goes, lodges inside your sinuses or the lungs, and then it gets activated and produces a mycelia, and sometimes it can invade when immunity is lost. Similarly, this can happen with ingestion, the loss is less likely, and third is inoculations. For example, injury to your skin soft tissue. Post injury, this can happen. By and large, inhalation route seems to be the commonest route, and though we inhale it regularly, it seldom produces major problems. Only time it produces problems is when your local immunity is severely damaged, when there is mucosal injury or some kind of systemic problem where the mucosal health is damaged, like the commonest being diabetes mellitus associated with DKA. Uncontrolled sugar is the commonest cause of mucormycosis throughout. We have been seeing mucormycosis associated with DKA continuously. So when do we see it as outbreaks? Generally, most of us see sporadic cases. We see sporadic cases with diabetic patients. We see sporadic cases with oncology patients. When do we see outbreaks? Sometimes when there is some massive construction going on, there's been reports of outbreaks. Rarely there has been healthcare associated mucos. It has been reported in the literature, especially when there's been issues with decontamination of equipment. There has been a hypothesis that air circulation can have a role in outbreaks. But despite all these things, let's talk about what causes it later. I'm just giving you one study which came in 2012, where they found after a tornado, these people were directly exposed to the tornado and had some injury, and 13 of them had mucormycosis. The zygomycosis was seen in 13 of them, and 5 of them died. All of them are the same species, and they're genetically found to be the same organism. So something called this tornado dispersed the spores, and those who had inoculation injury all developed severe mucormycosis. So mucormycosis has been associated with natural calamity. But it's been the first time when it's been associated with the infection like COVID, but otherwise it's been seen before. Talking about mucor and what causes it, this has been what we've seen through decades, because this trial came in 2005. They've not taken the decade after the 21st century. If you look into it, the commonest cause till now has been diabetes. And in our country, the commonest cause is still the diabetes. But as we look into it, the chance of malignancy and medullary transplantation, being the cause for zygomycosis, has gone up. Over the time, the transplants numbers have gone up, malignancy treatment has gone up. Similarly, you also have increased usage or increased patients are all immunocompromised taking other stuff. That also has gone up. So how do they present? The commonest is rhino-orbitocerebral. Something inoculates through the nose, enters into the sinuses, can produce a local sinus infection. From there, it can ascend to the orbit, to the cerebrum, can come to the oral cavity and produce a mass lesion. Pulmonary inhalational route lodges in the lungs, produce a pneumonia. Abdominal GI presentation, post ingestion. Soft tissue generally presents like a necrotizing fasciitis. There is focal skin necrosis, darkening, blackening, and produces fasciitis. Disseminated multi-organ involvement. So this is a presentation with rhino-orbitocerebral mucormycosis. It is an Indian trial. You will notice is the presentation of sinusitis, nasal distress being common like any other symptom. But you will notice there is necrosis in palatal area. There is some amount of swelling and ulceration. The enormity of the presentation, the enormity of the amount of edema is what should make you think about something like a fungal cause. Similarly, ophthalmic signs, they have proptosis, edema, swelling, eyelid necrosis. So generally the presentation is like any other sinusitis. Only thing is the symptoms and the signs are out of proportion with the patient's presentation. There will be quite a bit of reddening. Remember, this mucormycosis can have something like insidious slow progression and then acute progression. What we see now is an acute progressive involvement which can be pretty fatal. Next, this is a trial which they try to look into two large follow-ups within the Western world before 1995, 1995, 2005. And you will notice what was the thing which produced maximum death. It's all those vascular involvement produced a lot of death. Similarly, skin and orbital necrosis. You will notice among the eye signs, cheminosinus thrombosis and orbital necrosis. And if you look into the brain, it's the internal carotid artery necrosis. Remember, even if there's going to be an abscess, survival is much more. Whenever there is vascular involvement and whenever there is significant necrosis, outcome has been very bad. So in rhinocerebral mycosis, this was a trial from India where they looked into both aspergillus and mucor. You will notice mucor is much more worse than aspergillus. There's about 60% mortality with mucor. Radical surgery has some benefit. Again, it was odds ratio didn't come down really well. Immunocompromised state present was seen in quite a bit and mortality was increased in immunocompromised state. Anybody presenting with focal neurological deficit had an increased death. 75% died if they had a focal neurological deficit. Now, this was a Medline search which I used in the previous trial too. You will notice that the survival is around 60%. So, in rhino-orbitocerebral mycosis, everywhere in the world, the survival is around 60%. It has not improved over the last 20 years. And you will notice that medical treatment and surgical part. So, both of them are important, and there's been quite a bit of queries about when to start what. So whether early, delayed, quite delayed. But at this point of time, probably initiation of both, when the availability of both is probably is what is going to save most lives. This was a trial which talked about semi-invasive. That is, they go for invasion, but it is an invasive procedure, but it is not radical. So this was a rhinosinusitis without much of extension. They just went through it. They did an endonasal approach with endoscopy and an open approach. When they compared it, they realized that those of poor health status, endonasal approach and debridement through endoscopy was equivalent to open surgery. They say open surgery is preferred whenever there is extension to the intraorbital area, palatal extension, or any kind of CNS involvement. So finally, in rhino-orbitocerebral mucosis, and we will open it to discussion, favorable responses, surgical debridement, early antifungal, no involvement of central nervous system. Presenting with DKA produces unfavorable response. Coming on to pulmonary mucormycosis, pretty uncommon. We do see it now and again. We see it more with onco patients. We do see it with diabetic patients also. The death rate is pretty high, and you have a surgical medical approach combined together. If you look into table 4, you will realize diabetes seems to be the commonest cause. So 49% was diabetic patients. Death percentage has been around 57%, almost similar to your rhino-orbitocerebral mucormycosis. But in India, my mortality from pulmonary mucor has been pretty high as of now. So with regards to therapy, medical therapy alone, that's pretty high, 55%. Combining medical and surgical approach, mortality goes down to probably around 27%. And if you don't give any therapy, 100% death. GI mucormycosis, I wasn't able to find good case series. There's been individual cases and small numbers. It's something which is evolving. We started seeing more of it after the transplant programs. The commonest site is stomach, followed by colon and ileum. Survival data is based on smaller numbers, so still we are very unclear about it. Early antifungal and surgical debridement definitely has a good benefit in GI mucormycosis. So this was a review which was published in 2005 in CID, and this has been the basis for most of our presentation on this. They looked into a larger cohort in the Western world. We still don't have similar publication from India. So they've looked into the various aspects. Look, take about the sinus. If you see rhinocerebral mucormycosis, 60% mortality. Pulmonary, overall mortality is 70%. If it is part of disseminated, it's 95%. Cutaneous seems to have the lowest mortality, around 30%. Cerebral, remember it is disseminated, means literal no survivors. Localized, something like a brain abscess, it's around 60%. GI, again, it's 85% mortality. So if you look into it, anything where there is systemic involvement, the mortality has been high. Again, remember this was published in 2005 and probably accounted of people in the last century. Now the mortality at this point of time should have gone down, though the data for rhinocerebral mucormycosis still around 60%. Maybe the amount of mortality should have gone with other things because we have extremely good antifungals now and the surgical capability has also gone up dramatically. This is again the risk factors for mortality. Disseminated disease, patients with disseminated disease die more. There is no species preference. Diabetic, especially type 1, die more. If you have renal failure, if you have HIV infection, if you're not immunocompetent and develop a bad zygomycosis, you still die more. So whenever you give antifungal therapy and surgical therapy, the chance of survival is much higher. Everybody's been talking about oxygen and oxygen cylinders, but thing to remember is oxygen inhibits mucor growth. If you have highly oxygenated area, oxygen which is going around in high concentration, mucor cannot grow. So coming to this COVID, I've just given you an idea about mucor in general. Coming to the COVID, we have three kinds of presentation. Those who present in the active COVID phase, those who come after recovery from COVID, those who present with DKA. So what happens? Basically, COVID causes immunosuppression. It produces microthrombosis. So this produces a loss of local immune response. The mucosal immune integrity is lost. Add on to it, you have uncontrolled diabetes. Anybody with uncontrolled diabetes develops severe COVID, and they also require steroids. So it becomes a vicious cycle, which indicates probably the increased chance of mucor. How do you diagnose it? As I said, it's a clinical diagnosis. Remember, mucor presents like any other sinusitis, presents like any other or orbital cellulitis, presents like pneumonia. We need to have a high clinical suspicion at this point of time. And remember, the signs are out of proportion with the clinical presentation. When you have very prominent signs, please think about fungal infection. Imaging has a major role. So I'm not going to talk about imaging because obviously it's a 1-hour topic. So you will notice some kind of a mass lesion in the osteomeatal complex here. It's a CT scan. So whenever you have some kind of a sinusitis like in presentation with a breach of mucosa and bony involvement, please think about mucormycosis. MRI brain and contrast will give you an idea about brain involvement. Histopathological diagnosis, again I'm not an expert, you can see a broad-based fungi. So without aseptate, this is microbiologically KOH mount showing the broad-based fungi with aseptate. And this is a colony counts. They're talking about cottony, white with gray, black at the top. So that's an agar plate and the growth jars. So this is how you see in the smears, LCB mount. So you can see the sporangiospores, you can see the hyphae clearly. So how do you manage? First, tight sugar control. Again, it's a big session, one whole session on sugar control. Bharani is going to talk about it. Stopping or decreasing immunosuppressant. We have to understand that in COVID, immunosuppressant do not have a role for a prolonged period of time. Probably it has a role when the patient just about goes in for immune phase. And the immune phase may not last forever, maybe a week to 10 days, and you probably will have to think about coming down and stopping the steroids. Next comes management, comes both surgical debridement and antifungal therapy. Thinking about surgical debridement, the debate is still out, whether it's a serial endoscopic surgery or open debridement. And I will leave it to the surgeons to discuss about it. So whenever possible and feasible, an extensive debridement definitely helps. But if you feel that a patient is very sick, don't wait for the patient to rot and then take it up later. You can go for serial endoscopic debridement every 48 hours because some debridement is definitely better than no debridement, and every debridement definitely helps the patients. Simple logistics. Whenever there's a devitalized tissue, your antivirals do not enter in. So only when the devitalized tissue goes down, there is some amount of source control, patient's chance of recovery is better. Medical management, target the sugars between 100 to 200. And remember, when patients come in, a lot of them have issues with DKA. They'll be dehydrated. Some of them may be overhydrated. There will be a lot of electrolyte imbalance. Even with DKA, you can have potassium imbalance. Add on to it amphotericin, it will be much more. Talking about antifungal therapy, you have the gold standard amphotericin, which is divided into plain amphotericin, lipid-associated amphotericin, liposomal. Posaconazole, isavuconazole, all of them act well against mucor. Amphotericin is probably the most experienced. Now, I would always prefer amphotericin over everything else. So the plain amphotericin is something which we are very comfortable with. It's pretty safe. Don't bother about it. Give it as 1 milligram per kg. If you have a doubt, start with 0.7 and then go to 1 milligram. So it will be usually around 50 to 70 grams per person. Give it as an infusion in D5 over 5 hours. You can add some insulin into that if you're worried about glucose control. Give a saline before and after that 1 pint. You can add some KCl in it if you're worried about potassium correction. If there's a persistent hypokalemia, magnesium correction has to happen. Remember, amphotericin produces magnesium and potassium wastage, and that's one reason for renal dysfunction. Renal dysfunction is never acute in amphotericin. It is slow progressive. So, serial monitoring of creatinine, potassium, and magnesium, you'll be able to predict and make sure the patient, you can adjust the dose or stop and decide everything. Plain amphotericin is photosensitive, so make sure you protect it. Liposomal ampho, another option, very costly. I seldom get to use it, but less nephrotoxic. Going on to posaconazole, when I went into the literature, I was a bit dazed. In fact, not much is available on posaconazole and DKAs and mucor and diabetes, especially. So, and there are several issues with bioavailability and stuff, so I'm not even putting about the literature. Remember this, I would like it as a step down therapy rather than a primary therapy, but often when we don't have a choice, we end up using it. There are several issues, bioavailability, it has to be given with food, even the tablet forms, and bioavailability can still be low. So if possible, start with an IV dose for a few days before shifting to oral when you really don't have any access to amphotericin. Otherwise, for me, after amphotericin, a step down therapy, or patients who have some recrudescence with amphotericin or some renal dysfunction which is progressive, that's when I go for posaconazole. Suspension, anybody who's sick, please avoid. There is no point in giving it. Isavuconazole, again IV, it again has a loading dose. You give it 3 times a day initially for 2 days, then go down. I just went into one trial where it was, remember, 34 centers, only 37 patients over 5 years, and it's not found to be inferior to ampho. So, fine. Speaking specifically, we really don't have much experience of isavuconazole on mucor also. Finally, it boils down to one important drug, and that is amphotericin. So, surgical debridement and good amphotericin doses treatment is probably what is going to save our patients. So, coming back to that, please remember, patient-to-patient transmission of mucor is unlikely. We can have them in the same ICU without any problem. Next, coming for worry about hospital infection control. A lot of people call for this. No need for isolation. But remember, in decontamination, the equipment is always important because there is always a theoretical possibility of equipment being a source. For example, sometimes we reuse bougies, we reuse tongue depressors. They have to be really decontaminated. Wherever you can sterilize something, do it. Otherwise, go for aldehyde-based disinfectant because alcohol-based may not be enough for a spore. Environmental cleaning and decontamination, the regular one is more than enough. Make sure it is done. Summary of outcomes in mucor: control the risk factors. Right control of sugars, decrease the steroids to the minimum or stop it. Start systemic antifungal as early and go on for a long time. Duration of antifungal depends upon the patient's condition. Generally, the minimum will be 6 weeks, maximum goes up to 6 months. Optimal surgical debridement. What is the word optimal? Whether it is serial for a sick patient or a radical debridement, it all depends upon the patient picture. I'll open it out for the discussion. Remember, uncontrolled sugars causes severe COVID and it also causes severe mucormycosis. So control your sugars, stay safe. Thank you.